Dawn broke early in the fall of 1955 at Crovan's Gate. The amber glow crested the hills and shone upon the sheds of the Skarloey Railway. There within, 4 little engines rested comfortably as the sunlight peeked through the window. In the open shed next to the large brick one, a small diesel was being primed and readied for the day. Rusty was always the first engine out. The little diesel ran from Crovan's Gate to Skarloey and back again, making sure the line was in good nick and ready to go. By the time they returned, Peter Sam would be steamed up and ready for his first passenger train of the day. Around 6:15, Rusty was ready and backed into the siding to collect their works train. It consisted simply of a small crane, 2 open wagons for tools, the workman's coach, and Cora, the guard's fan. The workman got into the coach, and with a short horn blast, the little diesel moved out of the siding and carefully onto the open line. Rusty had a clear run through the Hawandui Valley, curving and weaving along. Soon, they felt the brakes come on. The workman requested a stop outside of Glenlock to check the track near the passing loop. The little diesel stopped just past the station platform, and the men grabbed their tools and checked the points. As the men began to work, a light mist descended on the valley. It was hardly unusual, but today it felt different. Rusty wasn't sure why it felt different, but it felt as if there was something else there, something that wasn't there before. Eventually, the men returned with their tools onto the trucks and climbed into the coach. Rusty's engine roared into life and he headed up the line. The little diesel continued up the line through Reneus and Skarloey stations. The mist became thicker as the train approached a lonely part of the lake. Around the lake there were 2 lines, one main and the other was a branch of sorts. The main line was the normal line that the passengers and goods traffic would take. However, the second line went down closer to the lake and was an older throughway for the long-defunct Wardfell Plateway. Rusty had never been down this way before, even on their countless trips up the line. Then, out of the blue, Rusty heard something. It was faint, deep. It sounded like a whistle. "Driver, did you hear that?" "Hear what?" Never mind." The little diesel was sure they were hearing things. Rusty traveled along the main track and arrived near Skarloey, but soon came to a stop. A fallen tree blocked the line outside of the village, and the men needed to remove it. Benson, the steam tractor, was already there, on the scene, ready to help the workmen saw the tree into smaller pieces. The foreman came up to Rusty's driver. "This might take a while. You can show yourself into that siding until we need the crane, probably a half hour or so. Benson can help move the larger bits." "Right you are." The foreman smiled and nodded. Little Diesel then reversed down the line towards the loop. Soon they stopped in the loop and Rusty glanced around as their driver jumped down and switched the points. Then Rusty noticed something else. "Look, driver." The driver looked. It was a very, very overgrown sidetrack. Bushes and trees covered the rails, and the sleepers were full of termite holes. "I've never seen this line before. I wonder where it goes. Can we look? We have some time still." Driver was a bit unsure. "I don't know, Rusty. It doesn't look safe." "Driver, I'm the maintenance diesel here. I need to inspect every line." Reluctantly, the driver walked over to the track and inspected it. "It looks risky. Please, driver, I'll be careful." The driver sighed and found the switch lever. The ancient switch groaned as it was changed to the abandoned line. The little diesel started up and rolled down the line, pushing past the bushes and brambles. The rails sagged and the sleepers creaked under Rusty's weight. The mist became heavier and heavier as the branches curved away from the track. Rusty gulped. They had never seen fog like this before. The little diesel looked around a bit more frantically. Every sound made them jump out of their frames. Eventually, Rusty reached an old abandoned yard with a few sidings. Broken trucks lay around. They looked like upturned slate wagons. A small, broken-down, partially collapsed building loomed in the distance. The track was very bumpy here. As they approached the buffer stop and Rusty looked around, the fog was so thick they could only make out faint shapes. Then, Rusty heard something again. It was faint and almost mournful. Little Diesel looked from one side to the other, from the lake to the woods. There was the sound again. "Driver, I hear that sound again." "What sound, Rusty? I'm trying to focus on the track." Rusty squinted through the fog but couldn't see anything. They looked around more frantically now and moved a little bit quicker. The Little Diesel was so focused on the sound that they didn't look what was in front of them. The buffer stop, worn from decades of disuse, wasn't able to hold an engine's weight, and neither could the track. Then, it all happened at once. Rusty, who was gaining speed, hit the buffers and smashed through them. The Little Diesel gasped as their wheels left the rails. They felt the rails hit some of the sleepers and then felt nothing at all. The driver jumped clear as Rusty plunged off a small jetty and landed into the water, face down. The water rippled as Rusty settled in. "Rusty! Rusty! Are you okay?" There was no reply from the Little Diesel. His driver ran back up the line yelling about Rusty. Rusty couldn't hear him. They were fully in the water, looking down into the lake. The water wasn't deep where the Little Diesel landed, but just a few meters more and Rusty would have been completely submerged. They looked down, scared to their frames, at what could have been their fate. It would have been all over for the Little Diesel. The dark abyss cried out, trying to take its next victim. Rusty felt like they had been down there for an eternity when they finally felt something on their back coupler. The workmen had run with their tools down the line to get Rusty out. Rusty continued to look down, hoping that this ordeal would be soon over. Then, the Little Diesel saw something that made them stop dead. Just as their eyes focused on it, "Go!" With much noise and straining and with one almighty heave, Rusty was pulled from the lake by Benson and the workmen. Rusty panted as they breathed in and out. The driver and the foreman ran to the Little Diesel to see if they were hurt. They looked all over and deemed Rusty safe to move. Some temporary rails were laid down, and with Benson's help, Rusty was re-railed. During the entire debacle, Rusty remained as silent as the grave. Their face was as white as a sheet. Eventually, they heard a whistle. It was Skarloey. Carefully, so as not to damage the track more, Skarloey had a strong cable attached to him, and with the help of the workmen and Benson, were able to pull Rusty back up onto the track to the passing loop. "Rusty, are you all right?" There was still no reply from the Little Diesel. They just looked at their buffers. Rusty remained silent, pale as a ghost, as Skarloey took them and the works train back to Croven's Gate. By then, Sir Handel and Peter Sam were already out and about. Peter Sam was the first passenger train, and Sir Handel was at the quarry shunting. Skarloey arrived in the yards and pushed Rusty back into the sheds. The Little Diesel continued to look at their buffers. Skarloey went away to shunt the trucks into the siding. Then they heard a small horn. It was Mark, Mr. Hughes' private tram. Out stepped him and the thin controller. The two men approached Rusty with worried expressions on their face. "Rusty, are you alright?" Rusty didn't reply, just stared off blankly towards his buffers. Mr. Hughes rallied again. "Rusty?" Still nothing. The thin controller and Mr. Hughes saw the expression on Rusty's face, one of horror. They exchanged a look. "All right, Rusty. We'll let you rest here for a little while and then come back. The maintenance trains can wait until later." The men turned around and walked away as Skarloey reversed next to Rusty. The old engine looked closely at them. There was a look on their face that Skarloey had never seen before. It scared him. "Rusty?" Little Diesel finally looked up, for the first time since the accident. "Skarloey?" Rusty's voice was very soft. It was hurt and sad. "Don't make me go back up there." Skarloey was confused. "Won't go back where, Rusty?" "The lake, that line. I never want to see that again. I never want to see what I saw again." "What did you see?" "I can't tell you. It's too much." They trailed off. Quietly in the distance, Rusty heard that whistle again, mournful and despairing. The Little Diesel began to shake. "All right, lad. I won't ask. We can probably manage the trains today, but I'm not sure how the thin controller will think about this tomorrow." I don't care, Skarloey. I'm not going back to the lake. Ever again. I can't. Skarloey sighed and headed away. Mr. Hugh came back and hopped into Mark and headed away. Rusty was now alone in the sheds. They sat quietly, contemplating what they had seen. Unfortunately, Skarloey was right. Thin Controller was not pleased with Rusty's refusal to leave the shed. This led to the other three engines having to do Rusty's work as well as their own. Skarloey and Peter Sam were more forgiving, but Sir Handel fumed all the while. But Rusty remained resistant, refusing to move from the sheds. At last, Sir Handel lost patience. "Are you ever going to move out of this shed?" he asked as he backed in for a rest. "We are being run ragged by your refusal to work. Do you not care about us? We are overworked. How could you do this to us?" "Coming from you, that's rich, pot calling the kettle black much?" Sir Handel scoffed. "Get off your high horse. You know I'm right. Now, if you would start up and decide to work and help us, then..." "That's enough, Sir Handel. Rusty has been a layabout for the past 5 days. It's high time that..." "Silence!" All three engines looked. It was the Thin Controller. "Good gracious me! I can hear you all arguing from the station." "Sir Handel, I understand your frustration and I'm here to talk to Rusty. Now, will you please leave us so we can discuss this? If it means getting Rusty out of the shed to do some actual work, then certainly." Sir Handel harumphed. He puffed out of the shed to shunt some trucks. The Thin Controller walked over to Rusty. Skarloey looked on. "Would you like me to leave too, sir?" But before the Thin Controller could say anything, Rusty spoke up. "Sir, I would like Skarloey to stay. I think he'd want to hear what I have to say." Skarloey looked at Rusty and puffed slowly forward. "Rusty, I would like to know why you will not leave the sheds." Rusty took a deep breath. They knew that it was time to tell the Thin Controller and Skarloey what they had seen. "Mr. Sam, please understand that I don't mean to cause any trouble, but in light of what I saw, I needed a few days to fully process and take in what had happened." Both man and engine closely looked at the little diesel. "Go on, Rusty. What did you see?" "When I fell into the water, my face was completely covered, and I could only look down and around me. I'm not sure how long I was down there, but right before I was attached to Benson, I saw something that made my oil run cold." "What did you see?" I saw an engine." The Thin Controller blinked. "A what?" "An engine, sir, covered in rust, almost a stain at the bottom of the lake. It had no cab. I couldn't see any wheels. And then there was something else missing. I didn't see a face. I couldn't see a nose or a mouth or eyes. But I didn't see a smoke box door either, like I've seen on the engines from the mainland. It was just a dark black spot. It was haunting, surreal." Trailed off. Thin Controller stood there, very confused and a bit disturbed. I can't believe what I'm hearing. How is this possible? An engine on my railway that I had no idea about?" "Not on your railway, sir." Rusty and the Thin Controller looked at the old engine. "What did you say, Skarloey?" "Rusty spoke of an engine in the lake. It wasn't an engine from our line. She is much older." "She?" "Yes. Her name was Lady Sarah. The men of the Plateway would tell me about an engine who disappeared and whose presence is still there." "Presence? Like a whistle?" "Exactly." "What can you tell us, Skarloey?" Skarloey looked at the Thin Controller and Rusty. He took a deep breath and began. "It was years before the Skarloey Railway opened, when the Wordfell Plateway Railway ran up the valley to a copper mine. It was originally a horse-worked railway, with the trucks running down the line by gravity and horses pulling them back up. Well, in 1842, it was decided that the railway wanted to test to see if a locomotive was worth for the Plateway. The owner reached out to Robert Stevenson and Company and purchased an engine. As locomotives were new back then, they were extremely expensive. I don't know what she looked like, but she was named Lady Sarah, after Lady Sarah Burlfine, the wife of Lord Robert Burlfine, the manager of the Plateway. Lady Sarah was shipped to Kirkronan and then taken by road to Croven's Gate in 1843. There she began to do her job pulling trucks up the Ward Fell so they could be filled with copper. She did this for many months. However, one day in the fall of 1843, a thick fog came into the valley. Lady Sarah was collecting some trucks from the quarry. The men felt they needed extra braking power because of the length of the train, so Lady Sarah was attached to the trucks. Unfortunately, many of the trucks lacked maintenance, and the braking power of the engine and the men still wasn't enough. Lady Sarah ran down the line and disappeared into the lake. The last thing they heard was a loud steam whistle, like the wail of a banshee. The men saw where she went and realized the lake was too deep to recover her. Make matters worse, the building of Lady Sarah strained the railway's finances, and within a year the railway declared bankruptcy and closed. It was abandoned until I got here in 1864. Both Reneus and I recall passing the area where the old Plateway Railway ran, near the lake, and hearing a kind of whistle, much like you had said, Rusty. We never really knew where it came from, but we had an idea of who it was. It was Lady Sarah, trying to tell us that she was still there, wanting us to put her to rest. If what you're saying is true, Rusty, she is now dying a slow and agonizing death. The pressure of being underwater for more than 100 years, I imagine, had some horrific consequences. You mentioned that her face was... Skarloey trailed off. Rusty and the Thin Controller remained silent and were in awe of the story. There, after a long pause, Rusty spoke. That poor engine. And I thought I was crazy. What can we do? The Thin Controller shook his head. Given what Skarloey said, I don't think that we can fix her. Even if we recovered her, she's too far gone to be put in service. Could we still recover her, sir? She deserves to be able to rest without pain or suffering. The Thin Controller pondered a moment. Please, sir? Healing a broken soul is all we can hope for. I think this will allow her to rest. The Thin Controller regained his voice. Yes, Rusty, I agree with you. A respectful send-off for her is exactly what she deserves. Don't you agree? The engines agreed, and the plans were set in motion. 2 days later, in the dead of night, while Peter, Sam, and Sir Handel slept soundly in their shed, Rusty, Skarloey, Thin Controller, and Mr. Hugh collected a flat truck and headed towards the abandoned Plateway. As soon as they arrived, Rusty made their way down to the lake. The little diesel was shaking in their frames. Rusty reached the broken track where some of the workmen had been mending the rails to get to the sunken engine. In the lake, a boat crane waited with its lines down to catch the rusted treasure below. Soon, all was ready. Rusty moved the flat truck into position. Skarloey, the Thin Controller, and Mr. Hugh watched on as the boat crane lowered its cables into the dark depths and void. Some spotlights came on, and divers went down into the lake to see what they could do. The crane lowered its hook with multiple chains attached. The divers attached the chains to the rusted hulk on the lake bed and began to slowly lift, making sure that the engine did not break apart. Rusty looked and saw some bubbles towards the surface. The crane arm lifted slightly as a rush of water came off a large object. Rusty looked at the object as it was placed on the flat truck. The workmen stopped and moved closer, as did Skarloey. They noticed what Rusty had said. The engine had no face. It wasn't a smokebox door either. It was like a face was there, but over time it just disappeared. Rusty moved forward as the remains of Lady Sarah were chained to the flatbed. Lady Sarah, I don't know if you can hear me, but my name is Rusty. I am an engine on the Skarloey Railway, the successor to your little line. It's the year 1955, and we've heard of your story. We're all so sorry it took so long, but we hope that you'll be able to rest in peace. Rusty coupled up to the flat truck and pulled it back to the main line. Skarloey moved ahead of Rusty to act as a pilot engine to make sure that Lady Sarah got to Croven's Gate unscathed. The men crowded in the coach behind him, and they all headed off to Croven's Gate, where Edward would be waiting to take Lady Sarah to the smelter's yard. Rusty pushed the flatbed the entire way, trying to imagine what Lady Sarah looked like after all these years had gone past. The cavalcade soon reached the wharf. Skarloey was uncoupled from the coach, and Rusty carefully moved Lady Sarah into position. The engines watched as a crane lifted the remains of the once proud engine onto a truck on Edward's train. Once the crane was back into place, Edward blew his whistle, and just as he began to pull away, Rusty and Skarloey looked up at Lady Sarah for the last time. Under the light of the moon, Lady Sarah's fully unobscured face shone forth. Her eyes were revealed to be two radiant blue eyes. She was truly beautiful. She smiled at the two engines and mouthed the words, "Thank you," as Edward puffed away. No sooner did her face appear than it disappeared once more, as Edward picked up speed. Two engines looked at one another as their crews moved them into the sheds. None of them said anything. They didn't need to. Neither Rusty nor Skarloey ever told the others what happened that night. Thin Controller and Mr. Hughes were also very tight-lipped on the subject. Rusty began running their trains again, but every so often, late in the night, the little diesel and the old engine look at one another. They only talked about that night once, 2 days after the rescue, when they both passed the lake in the fog and didn't hear the whistle. Do you think Lady Sarah finally found peace? Hard to say, but I think she did. I won't lie to you, Skarloey, and say that I wasn't scared. I was shaking the entire time. You did well, lad. The kindness you shared was worthy of note. May be known as the maintenance diesel around here, but you healed a broken and troubled soul that day. One that was finally able to rest easy. Rusty smiled and thanked Skarloey, and the two fell asleep. Little Diesel knew deep down that they had helped a wayward soul finally do the noble thing and move on from this life to the next. That, Rusty thought, was something that they would never forget.